Welcome to this explainer. Okay, think about the really major decisions you make in life. Choosing a career path, packing up and moving to a new city, or committing to a long-term relationship. We spend hours, weeks, honestly, sometimes even years weighing all the pros and cons. And we do all of this with one ultimate goal in mind. We just want to be happy. But here's the crazy paradox at the very heart of our lives. Despite all this intense effort, we are actually remarkably terrible at predicting what will actually make us happy. So today we're diving straight into the brilliant insights from Harvard psychologist Daniel Gilbert's work, Stumbling on Happiness. We're going to uncover exactly why our brains constantly lead us astray and, more importantly, how we might finally get it right.
So, let me ask you this. What is it that truly makes humans unique among all animals? You might immediately jump to our opposable thumbs, right? Or maybe our capacity for complex language, or the fact that we build these massive, intricate societies. But the real answer is actually a very specific, almost magical cognitive superpower.
Well, let's dive right into it. That superpower is called prospection. Thanks to our large, newly evolved frontal lobes, our brains basically act as a mental time machine. We are literally the only animals on Earth that can close our eyes and vividly simulate a world that doesn't even exist yet. This biological marvel is what allows us to plan for retirement, stress out about next week's presentation, and totally daydream about our next vacation. Even the mere act of anticipating a future event brings us joy, and it fulfills this deep, fundamental human need to feel like we have control over our lives. But, as we're about to see, this shiny mental time machine comes with some pretty serious factory defects.
Part 1. The Subjectivity of Happiness, a Private Experience. To really understand the first major glitch in our mental time machine, we have to look at the deeply private nature of happiness. It's incredibly difficult to observe and measure someone else's experience from the outside. Take the fascinating, real-life story of conjoined twins Lori and Rita Schappel. They've spent their entire lives attached at the forehead, sharing a blood supply and even part of a skull. Now, the medical consensus and the general public usually just assume their lives must be miserable. People argue that separation surgery is an absolute ethical imperative. Yet the twins themselves are joyful, they're playful, and they're highly optimistic. As Reba points out, they completely reject the idea of separation. So how can they possibly be happy in a situation that most of us would imagine as utterly desperate?
Well, one way we try to rationalize this is through what Gilbert calls the language squishing hypothesis. We look at them and assume that because Lori and Reba haven't experienced the exact same things we singletons have, like, say, snorkeling or doing cartwheels in an open meadow, their background of happy experiences must be impoverished. So when they get a simple birthday cake, they rate it an 8 out of 10 on the joy scale. According to this theory, they just sort of squish their language, meaning the absolute peak experience they call an 8 is really just equivalent to a mediocre 4 for us. It basically allows us to comfortably tell ourselves, oh, they don't really know what true happiness is.
But hold on, there is a paradigm-shifting alternative here. It's called the experience-stretching hypothesis. What if their impoverished experiential background doesn't squish their language, but instead actually stretches their real experience? This would mean that when they say 8, they mean exactly what we mean when we say 8. The intense, very real joy they get from that birthday cake is neurologically and emotionally identical to the joy we might get from doing an underwater cartwheel along the Great Barrier Reef. They aren't wrong about their own happiness. We are just completely unable to accurately judge their subjective reality from the outside looking in.
Part 2. 3 Failures of Imagination. Predictable Glitches. Because happiness is so entirely subjective, and our own experiences act as this unremovable lens, our attempts to imagine our own future happiness are continuously sabotaged. We think we're painting a highly accurate picture of tomorrow, but our mental machinery actually suffers from 3 distinct, predictable glitches. We can break these down into Daniel Gilbert's rule of 3 for cognitive failures: realism, presentism, and rationalization. Each one of these represents a critical blind spot where our imagination just takes massive liberties without ever telling us it's doing so. Let's break down exactly how each of these operates to distort our future choices.
Let's start with the first failure, realism. Our brains are essentially these hyperactive, pattern-making machines. They automatically fill in missing details and leave others out entirely behind the scenes. When we try to imagine a drastically different life circumstance, like going blind, our mind's eye zeroes in on just one dimension: the loss of sight. We picture eternal darkness, but in doing so we completely omit the realities of a full human life. We forget that a blind person still enjoys rich relationships, fulfilling work, really good food, and laughter. Our imagination completely fails to notice what's missing from its own picture, creating a massive blind spot.
And that brings us to the second failure, presentism. You can think of presentism as the tyranny of the now. When we try to predict how we're going to feel next year, we unfairly project our current emotional state right onto our future selves. If we're depressed today, we imagine the future as completely bleak, unable to picture ourselves ever really enjoying anything again. Or if we're obsessed with a particular food right now, we just assume we'll want it every single day, completely forgetting about the habituation effect, the fact that repeated experiences naturally bring us less pleasure over time. We simply fail to account for just how much we and the entire world around us will inevitably change.
Part 3. The psychological immune system. Psychological resilience.
Which brings us to the third and honestly perhaps the most fascinating failure of imagination, rationalization. This involves a hidden, incredibly brilliant defense mechanism built right into the human brain that fundamentally breaks our ability to predict how badly things will actually hurt us. It's called the psychological immune system. When we imagine a negative event, like losing a prestigious job or going through a really painful breakup, we imagine ourselves being devastated forever. But that is because our imagination totally fails to factor in our own resilience. Once a bad thing actually happens, this system kicks into gear unconsciously. It reframes the event, rationalizes the loss, and helps us adapt. It perfectly balances our emotions, so we feel just good enough to cope with the situation, but bad enough to actually get up and do something about it.
Let's test your own imagination in real time. Think of a truly catastrophic, life-altering event. How long do you imagine it takes a survivor of a major earthquake, someone who has literally lost their home and their entire community, to recover their previous levels of optimism? What do you think? 6 months? A year? 5 years?
Well, here's the crazy punchline about human resilience. Research actually shows that within just a few weeks, even earthquake survivors tend to return to their previous levels of optimism. I know, it sounds impossible, but we severely and consistently underestimate our own capacity to adapt and heal. The pain of a setback fades so much faster than our flawed mental time machines predict it will.
Part 4. How to predict happiness, a practical solution.
So we clearly have a problem here. If our frontal lobe is this hopelessly flawed time machine, blinded by missing details, totally trapped in the present moment, and completely unaware of our own psychological immune system, how on earth are we actually supposed to make good decisions? Well, we need a practical, science-backed workaround. Gilbert calls this ultimate solution corrigibility. It's basically our ability to be corrected or improved. Since we know for a fact our imaginations are just creating illusions of foresight, we have to step outside of our own heads. To hack our predictive failures, we must rely on the actual lived experiences of other human beings.
So, the absolutely crucial point is this. The deeply flawed strategy is closing your eyes, trusting your own biased imagination, and trying to guess how a new job or a huge cross-country move is going to feel. The winning strategy? Finding someone who is currently experiencing that exact situation and asking them how they feel right now. Because their psychological immune system has already adapted, and because they are experiencing the messy reality rather than an imagined sketch, their real-time report is by far the most accurate guide you could possibly have to your own future happiness.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought to consider today. If you absolutely cannot trust your own mind's eye to predict what will bring you joy, whose future are you actually living? Before you take your next major step, stop relying on your flawed imagination. Acknowledge the limitations of your own brain, find someone who's already standing exactly where you want to be, and just ask them. That bit of humility might just be the very thing that allows you to finally stumble upon true happiness. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.